Hi everyone. Welcome back to Book Talk Tuesdays. I'm Miss Jessica. I'm one of the youth and teen librarians at the Chelsea District Library, and I have a special guest here with me today.
Hi, I'm Sara Wedell. I am also a librarian, and I live here in Chelsea.
Yeah, Sara works at the Ann Arbor Library, so she is pretty close to us. And today we are going to talk all about brand new historical fiction books. All of these books are new. They were all written this year. And this is a very special topic for me and Sara because we are big fans of historical fiction. We are both very, very big Little House fans. There might have been sunbonnets involved in, I think, probably both of our childhoods.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of one of our favorite genres, and we have some great books for you. So the first one I want to talk about is called Alicia, Alonso Takes the Stage. And Sara, have you heard of the anthology Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls?
No.
That? You haven't? Oh, it's so good. So it is a collection of short biographies about women from history who should be famous, but we don't always hear the women's side of history. It's a really, really great little collection of biographies, and they're short enough that you can kind of read them as bedtime stories. So the same organization has started making a chapter book series based on these women's lives. And I chose to read the one about Alicia Alonso because she was a professional ballerina from Cuba, and I've taken ballet my whole life. And I had never heard of her. So I really wanted to learn something new. And the book follows, it's not just focused on her childhood, it follows kind of her whole life through. And she is a Cuban girl growing up in Havana in the 1920s. She loves to dance, and her parents find a ballet class to enroll her in. And she is determined to become a professional ballerina with all of her classes and hearing all the stories her instructor shares about the famous ballerina Anna Pavlova. And eventually she makes it. She moves to America. She is dancing for several different ballet companies. One day, she has an accident on stage. She bumps into some scenery, and it's not a super bad fall, but it is enough to injure her eye. And she ends up having several surgeries. She can't dance at all, and she even has to move back home to Cuba to live with her family for a whole year and try and recover. So you're going to have to read this book and find out if she's able to dance again. I really like this chapter book. I think it would be a great series for kids in 3rd and 4th grade. They're not super long books, which is really nice if you just want to read something quick. And they really reminded me of the American Girl books too. So because you got a chance to sort of see inside the era and the setting and the location where she lived and grew up too. So that was a nice little read. I liked it.
So my first read is called The Plot to Kill Hitler, book 1 of a series called Conspiracy. Or no, maybe the Plot to Kill Hitler is the series. So it's called Conspiracy. It's by Andy Marino. Book 2 is coming out next. So spoiler, they do not kill Hitler.
By the way, I think there's 3 total, and I ordered all 3. So
great.
All coming. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm eager to see what happens next. So it's historical fiction. It takes place during World War II. It's about a German family living in Berlin in the early 1940s. And they are constantly dealing with air raids. You learn a lot about how they had to deal with air raids, which was interesting, stuff I didn't know. You had to leave your door open so that the pressure, if a bomb fell nearby, wouldn't explode your house.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
One of their jobs, when they hear the sirens, one of the kids would run and open the door and prop it open. And the other kid would go and turn off the power so there'd be no electricity sparks or anything.
Yeah, you gotta make sure the stove is off. You don't want the gas line on, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they would turn off these things. It's really interesting to hear some of those details. They were really good at nailing down the little everyday things that they deal with. So this family, their father is a doctor in Berlin, and they become involved in, the plot to kill Hitler. They become involved in the Berlin underground resistance. And so the kids are doing some secret, they're dropping codes and documents for Jewish families who are hiding. But somehow they keep getting followed, and you don't quite know who to trust. And so these kids, they are so determined There's a lot of action. Like, it's a real page turner because you just keep like waiting to find out who's around the next corner. Is it this guy? Is it this person? There's a lot you can't trust. And then as you're going, at the end, there's an author's note about some of the real figures or the figures that characters were based on in history. So I learned a lot of everyday detail that I did not know. And then there's some figures from history that I was not familiar with that I got really curious about. So it was a great gateway book. I'm excited to know there's 2 more because I will totally read them. I would like to know what happens to the Hoffman brothers and sisters.
That sounds awesome. Actually, because you know what? I think all of the books I read actually had back matter too. So the Alicia Alonso book had a few pages of ballet moves in it. So you could learn a little bit about ballet, learn how to do pliés and relevés too. So I
That's
love
one of my favorite things about historical fiction. You are enjoying a good story, and then along the way, you are learning stuff about a different era, different people, a way of life that you never would have known. I love it. That's why we have chosen the best genre to be our favorite.
Exactly. Okay. So I also have a World War II book, and it has some similar themes, but I think it would be better for a little bit older reader. It's called The Village of Scourges by Margie Preuss, and it is about a small village in the Vichy region of France, and where a lot of Jewish people and other refugees from World War II have sort of filtered down that direction, escaping the Nazi regime as they have overtaken and started occupying France. And the village is pretty isolated. It's on the side of a mountain. The only way to access it is through a really winding, twisty, kind of dangerous road, or through this tiny little train that sort of chugs up the side of the mountain. And they've been pretty isolated. Things have mostly gone on as normal. They've noticed a few changes, like not as much food, letters in the mail sometimes is a little bit hit or miss. But for the most part, they've been pretty protected. Until one day, a policeman shows up in town. And he's supposedly there to keep peace and order in the village, but they really know he's basically been sent there to spy on them and report back about what's happening in that area. And there's a special school in this village, so there's a lot of extra teenagers basically that are around to go to school there. And there isn't really one main character to the story. Instead, it focuses on this group of students who all decide together that they are going to do whatever it takes to protect their Jewish neighbors and friends. And they start up basically an underground resistance ring. One of them forges documents. He's expert at it. He can copy anything. Another uses his sled to carry children and families out from the village in the dead of night. And they all kind of have their own job to do here. The plot gets more intricate. Some convalescent German soldiers, so soldiers who have been hurt in fighting and battles, are brought to the village and they sort of take over the hotel that's right next to the school. And it's all based on true events. So there's actually a huge section in the back that goes through the real people that the book characters are all based on. And it even has pictures, which I thought was really, really cool. And I couldn't stop thinking about this book. It reminded me of 2 books I loved as a kid, Snow Treasure, because they sled down like the main street of the hill all the time. They use sleds, but also things like just trays and boards and things like that. And then Number the Stars.
Number the Stars is a big one for me.
Yes, I loved both of those so much. So we think of World War II as being so long ago, and we sort of romanticize the idea of being a spy and forging documents or being a runner like the characters in your book where they're passing documents along and things like that. But this Village of Scourges was just a great reminder to me that it was ordinary people and usually young people who were able to find the courage to do these extraordinary things. So it was a great read.
Was it an exciting book? I mean, because the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, the stakes were really, really high. I don't want to give away too much because, like I said, the plot is really intricate. And but there were some moments where I just had to keep reading. I knew it was time to go to bed, but I couldn't stop reading because I had to see what was going to happen next. So it's a good one.
Okay, so my second book It's called Orphan 11 by Jennifer Choldenko. And she wrote the Al Capone Does My Shirts series of books about orphans who run away and join a circus in the Depression in the 1930s in America. I did not really want to read this book because orphans and the Depression, and it just sort of, it sounded like not very uplifting, and it wasn't an era not like World War II is uplifting, but it didn't feel like one I wanted to read. But said I would read it, so I opened it up and read a couple pages, and I was hooked pretty fast. Jennifer Choldenko is an incredible writer. So she's like just such a good storyteller that she ended up getting me hooked, even though I intentionally did not want to read it. Like against my will, she got me interested. And then you really start to care about, she developed these characters so quickly that immediately you knew, like, you can't trust Bald Doris. Eugene would do anything for you. Nico is a sweetheart. And there's something up with Lucy. Lucy is the main character, and she doesn't talk. She can talk, but she doesn't. And you don't find out why until like late. But when you figure out why, and you got to the end of the story, there was an author's note about the story that she heard. And this is one of those cases where the author must have just run into this story and it was too good to leave alone. I think she said she'd been working on this book for like 7 years. Wow. So it's been like turning over, because she's written a lot of other stuff in that time. So this has like definitely spent time in the back of her brain and in a drawer while she was like figuring out the pieces. So the problem that Lucy has is based on a study that they did in the 1930s in Iowa. And they did this kind of study using orphans. It's a really interesting story about ways that scientists have done things that they shouldn't, the effect that it has on people. Like it's a story that goes really deep. You think about the impact that anything has on anyone, and it really like connects how connected everything is together. I can't stop thinking about this book now from the time, from the time reading it. You learned a lot about the circus, which was interesting, and the different jobs. And there was also like, you learn a lot about how the people who stick together versus the people who look out for themselves, and how that works out for people in the end.
So my last book is completely different.
Okay, good.
I read the third book of the Dactyl Hill Squad series. It's called Thunder Road by Daniel Jose Older. This series is just bananas. It takes the idea that dinosaurs exist and they're real and they're still alive, and it's during the Civil War era. So like I said, it's just
T-Rexes.
Yes, they do. Okay, so the main character is a girl named Magdalise, and she's actually an orphan from New York City. She's from the Dactyl Hill area of Brooklyn. We'll get to that in a second. And this is the third book in the series, and so it started off immediately where book 2 left off. So you definitely need to read this series in order, or else you're going to be really confused. It took me a few minutes to get into it and realize what was going on. Magdalise has just rescued her brother Montez. They're in this old mansion in the swamplands of Louisiana. They have just fought off a big group of Confederate bog marauders, and they're sort of planning what to do next. They do have some grown-ups with them, thank goodness. So it's a group of kids, but they also have some adult soldiers from the Union Army with them, which made me feel a lot better about everything that was going on. So I don't want to give too much away because it's just, it's really funny. It's a funny book, but it's all based on true battles. So they go to real places, real battle scenes. They're right in the action for things that were actually happening during the Civil War. But there's a lot of humor in it too, because they're fighting with dinosaurs.
It's historical fiction, like plus fantasy.
Yes, exactly.
That's really cool. Those feel like two genres that do not meet very often.
But the way it's done here is just amazing. There's extensive back matter, just like in some of these other books. So the author has included glossaries of the real people. He's included glossaries of battle sites, some of the equipment that's used, and the dinosaurs. So Dactyl Hill obviously is based off of, pterodactyls, but it's based off of a real area in Brooklyn that existed during this time period, and an orphanage there that was basically a community of African Americans that had started up this orphanage and this small section of Brooklyn to keep themselves safe from all the violence of the time. So there's a ton of basis in real historical fact. It just has a very, very fantastical spin to it. So
interesting. I love that it's very solidly historically accurate, except that there's dinosaurs.
Yes,
there.
exactly.
Like a big except. All right. Well, my last book is called Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park, who is an incredible author. I love her work. And so this is very, very based on the Little House stories. I mean, anything on a prairie, and they land in Dakota territory, in a place based on DeSmet, where Laura and the Ingalls family lived out. Her family lived out the rest of their days, and a lot of the books take place there. This was an excellent book. This is a 5-star book from me. This is a highly recommend. I would probably buy this book and keep reading it. She's a wonderful, wonderful storyteller, and she has thought these details out so much. If you've never read Little House, this is still a good book.
Good.
Like, you don't need to have read those or love those to like this. This is very much a story about not fitting in. It's a story about racism. It's a story about the disadvantage that people who face prejudice are faced with. This character, Hannah, she and her dad they've crossed the country from Los Angeles, which is where her dad married her mom, who was half Chinese, half Korean, and interracial marriages were not accepted, but they found a way, and they loved each other, and Hannah was born, but it was a dangerous place. And there's a lot of independence in this story of how she chooses to act, how she carries herself. She knows she has to represent herself very well, both to make her mom proud, but also because people don't know what to expect from her, but they don't have a good connotation. So she's starting at a deficit all the time. She's so, so brave. The thing she really wants to do is go to school. If you can imagine that somebody wants so badly to go to school. So it makes her stand out in a town where she was trying not to be noticed. And that has pretty big repercussions for her, but she doesn't let it stop her. And a situation like that brings out the people that you can trust. So that's a pretty stark part of the book. But she manages to make it light. Like, this is not a real heavy book. It's going to be so meaningful to people who are Little House fans. And a big part of this in the back, her author's note, I think, stands out to me more than anything in the book, that Linda Sue Park is Korean, and she loved the Little House books, but there's a lot of racism that's in those books. The way Native Americans are depicted, the way Black people are depicted. There's some scenes with blackface that need to be discussed when you discuss, like, in context. It was a part of the time. It is not okay, and that has to color the way that we see those books.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it doesn't mean there's not something of value there. And Linda Sue Park talks about writing this book so that she could love Little House again. She's like imagining what, a person of color would be facing there. And she puts this character there to play out the scene. And she's got some stand-ins when she mentions, like, oh, and this person was meant to be like Pa Ingalls, and this person might have been like so-and-so. And it's interesting. And it's a brilliant exercise in expanding the universe of a book, of a series that is meaningful. I think it was a genius choice on her part. I think she could not have done a better job, and it makes me, I admire her so much. And now she's given me a new avenue to appreciate books that that I've loved. So yeah, this has changed my Little House worldview, and that is a significant statement from a Little House fan.
So I just got my copy of Prairie Lotus. I'm so excited to read this book now. That's over the past few years, I've really struggled with some of the problematic pieces of the Little House books that you mentioned. So this gives me some hope that I can find a new way to view that series and enjoy something new and different too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for helping me with Book Talk Tuesdays. I think that we covered some great books in the best genre, and I'll see everyone later. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.